Before we go any further, if you value hard-earned historical knowledge, practical survival wisdom, and the kind of techniques that mattered when systems failed, subscribe to this channel now and share it with someone who takes preparedness seriously. This channel exists to preserve methods that kept people alive long before modern conveniences, and today's subject is one of those quiet, underestimated tools that has proven itself again and again when power disappears. Let me start with something that deserves your full attention. In every era of crisis, wartime blackouts, fuel shortages, winter sieges, economic collapse, cold has always been a more reliable killer than hunger. When electricity fails, modern homes become fragile boxes. What most people don't realize is that one of the simplest heat sources ever relied on by ordinary people is still just as effective today. The clay pot survival heater is not a modern hack, not a social media trick, and not a miracle device. It is a controlled method of capturing, storing, and radiating heat using materials that civilizations have trusted for thousands of years. Understanding how and why it works puts you ahead of most people who rely entirely on the grid. Why clay and fire have always been trusted partners in survival. Clay has been used for heat management since the earliest permanent settlements. Ancient homes across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa relied on thick clay walls, earthen ovens and ceramic vessels to absorb heat and release it slowly. The principle is thermal mass. Clay absorbs heat energy from a flame and releases it over time as radiant warmth. This is not speculation. It is the same principle behind masonry stoves that heated homes for generations before central heating existed. The clay pot heater takes that principle and compresses it into a small, portable system. A simple flame produces heat quickly but unevenly. Clay smooths that heat curve, turning sharp bursts into steady warmth that lingers long after the flame stabilizes. This is why a clay pot, warmed by a candle, continues radiating heat even when the air temperature remains low. So, let's talk about how the clay pot survival heater actually functions in real terms. At its core, the system consists of a heat source, usually candles, and one or more unglazed clay pots inverted above that flame. The flame heats the trapped air, the clay absorbs that energy, and then the pot radiates heat outward into the room. Now, this doesn't violate physics, and it certainly doesn't create heat from nothing. What it does, really, is reduce heat loss and redirect energy that would otherwise rise uselessly to the ceiling. In a small enclosed room, this can raise perceived warmth significantly. Not because the air temperature spikes dramatically, but because radiant heat warms objects and people directly. Historically, this mattered more than air temperature alone. Survivors of long winters understood that radiant warmth conserves calories, prevents hypothermia, and allows sleep without constant fuel consumption. How people have used this method during real-world crises. During fuel shortages in Europe after major wars, households used improvised ceramic heaters to survive rationed winters. In off-grid rural homes, similar systems were used in barns, workshops, and sleeping quarters where full fireplaces were impractical. Even today, people living in vans, boats, and remote cabins rely on variations of this concept to supplement heat safely. One practical example is using a clay pot heater inside a single closed room during a power outage. Instead of trying to heat an entire house, families historically isolated one room, sealed drafts, and concentrated heat where it mattered. The clay pot heater would run continuously for hours using candles that were cheap, storable, and easy to ration. How to apply this knowledge safely and effectively today? This system demands respect. Open flames consume oxygen and produce heat that must be managed responsibly. The heater should always be placed on a non-flammable surface, away from curtains, furniture, or foot traffic. Ventilation matters. A cracked window or slight airflow ensures oxygen levels remain safe while retaining most of the heat benefit. In practical terms, this heater is best used to maintain survivable warmth, not, tropical comfort. It pairs well with layered clothing, insulated rooms, and intentional living spaces. In a grid-down scenario, you would combine this with thermal curtains, closed doors, and limited movement between rooms. Historically, people slept, cooked, and worked in the same heated space for efficiency, and this heater supports that mindset. What this heater does and does not replace. The clay pot survival heater does not replace a wood stove or furnace. What it replaces is helplessness. It is a bridge between no heat and full-scale heating systems. In history, survival often depended on having something rather than nothing. This heater gives you control, predictability, and a way to stretch limited resources. Candles store indefinitely, clay does not fail, and the system requires no moving parts. That reliability is why such methods endured for centuries. When modern systems fail, ancient principles resume their relevance immediately. Why serious historians and survivalists should care about this? This heater represents more than warmth. It represents continuity of knowledge. Every generation that forgets how to manage heat without infrastructure becomes more fragile. Understanding this system is not nostalgia. It is competence. It is knowing how people lived through winters that lasted longer than fuel supplies, wars that shut down cities, and crises that made improvisation a daily skill. If this kind of grounded, historically proven survival knowledge matters to you, subscribe to this channel now. Share this video with someone who believes preparedness is learned, not bought. This channel exists to preserve what worked when it truly mattered, and there is much more to come.